German laughter and the American crisis. The German generals laughed. To them, the very idea was ridiculous. That the Americans could storm a shore in Normandy and then somehow push hundreds of miles inland, feeding an army that consumed mountains of fuel and oceans of ammunition. They had lived the brutal truth of mechanized warfare on the Eastern Front. They knew how quickly tanks became useless steel if gasoline failed to reach them. They had seen armies starve not from lack of courage, but from empty supply lines. And so they mocked. America, in their eyes, was an industrial brute, capable of building trucks, tanks, and planes by the thousands, but far too clumsy to sustain those machines once the roads grew long and the battlefields chaotic. They assumed that by August 1944, the U.S. war machine would sputter out on the roads of France, its column stranded, its advance stalled. But as the Allied breakout exploded after Operation Cobra, German certainty began to crack. Patton's Third Army moved like lightning, racing through Brittany, sweeping across the Loire, and pushing eastward at a pace that shocked even its own commanders. Towns fell in rapid succession, German rearguards collapsed, and liberation spread faster than maps could be updated. Yet with every mile gained, the supply problem grew more dangerous. The front lines were no longer just a short drive from the Normandy beaches. They were now hundreds of kilometers away. Cherbourg, captured with such effort, lay in ruins. The Mulberry harbors, ingenious floating ports built after D-Day, were already battered by storms and stretched beyond design. Railroads had been bombed, bridges blown apart, and highways scarred by retreating German units. The American soldier at the sharp end now fought a new battle. Not against German tanks, but against distance, time, and hunger. Fuel was vanishing as fast as it arrived. On some days, Patton's tanks consumed nearly 3 million liters of gasoline. Trucks meant to haul food and ammunition were diverted almost entirely to hauling fuel. Mechanics cannibalized wrecks for spare parts. Infantry divisions survived on rations that barely arrived in time. Soldiers joked grimly that they were not fighting the Germans, they were fighting the battle of the gasoline. German officers, reading the reports, allowed themselves a thin smile. To them, this was proof. The Americans had outrun themselves. Their Blitz would die the same way so many German offensives had, with empty tanks, with soldiers waiting for trucks that never came, with commanders forced to halt not for enemy fire, but for lack of supplies. And for a brief moment, it seemed the laughter might be justified. Armored spearheads sat idle for days, waiting for gasoline. Units rationed their ammunition, holding fire because resupply could not reach them. Every extra kilometer gained made the lifeline thinner, the problem worse. But what the Germans did not know was that behind the front, American logisticians were not panicking, they were planning. They refused to accept that the offensive would slow. They refused to give the enemy time to recover. And so they began to sketch out an idea so audacious, so relentless, that it would turn ridicule into silence. This would not be a battle fought with rifles or tanks. It would be fought with convoys, with engines that never stopped, with drivers who pushed through night and exhaustion. The Germans had laughed at America's logistics. They were about to witness a logistical miracle. The birth of the Red Ball Express, the artery that would fuel Patton's Blitz and shatter German illusions once and for all. The artery of steel and fire. August 1944. France was burning. The Allied armies were moving faster than anyone had dared to imagine. Patton's tanks surged forward like unleashed thunder, but behind them stretched a fragile lifeline. Without fuel, without ammunition, without food, the mighty Third Army would become nothing more than a stranded column of steel. Eisenhower knew it. Bradley knew it. Patton himself knew it better than anyone. The advance could not stop. But how could an army that burned millions of liters of gasoline a day be kept alive on the move? The answer was as desperate as it was brilliant. The Americans would create a supply system unlike anything the world had ever seen. A non-stop one-way conveyor belt of trucks that would thunder across France, day and night, carrying the lifeblood of war. They called it the Red Ball Express. From the moment it began on August 25, 1944, the operation looked more like a gamble than a plan. Entire roads were seized and marked with giant red circles. Signs that meant priority, that meant do not stop these trucks for anything. Civilian traffic was banned. Military police lined intersections. Loaded convoys went out on one road, empty trucks returned on another, forming a ceaseless loop of steel. At its peak, more than 6,000 trucks joined the flow, moving over 12,000 tons of supplies per day. Engines roared across broken roads, through villages still scarred by war, over bridges that groaned under the weight. The sight was unforgettable, endless columns of GMC deuce-and-a-half trucks, each packed to the limit with jerrycans of gasoline, crates of artillery shells, boxes of food, even medical supplies. But it was the men inside those trucks who carried the real burden. Many were barely trained drivers, young soldiers suddenly tasked with navigating war-torn roads under blackout conditions. 3 out of every 4 were African American, serving in segregated units. Denied combat roles by prejudice, they were now handed one of the most dangerous and essential jobs of the war. They drove until their eyes blurred, until their hands cramped around the wheel, until exhaustion made them hallucinate. Some never came back, lost in crashes, in ambushes, or in flames when a single spark turned their fuel-laden truck into an inferno. The rules were brutal. No stopping except for 10 minutes every hour. No hesitation. If a truck broke down, it was left behind. Mechanics would salvage it later, or strip it for parts. Convoys drove through the night without headlights, guided only by the faint glow of the truck ahead. One mistake, one wrong turn, and dozens of vehicles could collide in the dark. Yet they pressed on, because they had to. The convoys became targets. German artillery occasionally shelled the roads. Luftwaffe aircraft, in their last desperate sorties, strafed the columns. Snipers fired from hedgerows. Mines lurked beneath muddy tracks. Still, the drivers kept rolling. Some painted slogans on their trucks. Keep 'em rolling, no mission too tough, or simply victory. For them, courage was not charging a machine gun nest. It was keeping the pedal down at 2 a.m. on a narrow road, knowing a single bullet or bomb could turn their cargo into a fireball. The Red Ball Express was not polished. It was raw, improvised, held together by sweat and grit. Trucks ran on bald tires, engines rattled with missing parts, and some drivers carried spare cans of oil to dump in mid-journey just to keep moving. But it worked. In just weeks, the Express delivered hundreds of thousands of tons of supplies. It was not elegant. It was relentless. And it was exactly what Patton needed. His tanks roared forward, fueled not by luck, but by the convoys behind him. Each jerrycan delivered, each shell carried forward, was another blow against the collapsing German front. The laughter of the generals in Berlin had faded into silence, replaced by disbelief. The Americans, whom they had mocked as clumsy logisticians, had built a supply artery more powerful than any army Germany had ever faced. The Red Ball Express was more than trucks and gasoline. It was proof that victory in modern war belonged not only to the men with rifles, but to the men who kept the engines alive. And soon, it would carry Patton straight to the gates of Germany itself. The Blitz that silenced German laughter. Autumn 1944. The engines never stopped. The Red Ball Express had transformed the broken roads of France into a roaring artery of war, and at the end of that artery stood General George S. Patton. Fueled by the convoys, his Third Army became a storm sweeping across Europe. Fast, relentless, unstoppable. Patton understood better than anyone that his tanks were only as strong as the gasoline inside them. He told his staff bluntly, "My men can eat their belts, but my tanks have got to have gas." Thanks to the Red Ball Express, they did. Day after day, the convoys delivered the lifeblood of his Blitz, millions of liters of fuel, endless crates of ammunition, and the supplies to keep an army on the move. Where others saw logistical limits, Patton saw opportunity, and he seized it. The surge into Lorraine. As September turned into October, Patton's columns thundered east. They smashed across the Moselle, broke through German rearguards, and drove into Lorraine. Entire German units, battered and exhausted, crumbled under the speed of the American advance. Town after town fell in days, villages liberated, enemy strongholds bypassed. What stunned observers was not just the strength of Patton's army, it was the pace. The Wehrmacht had never faced an enemy that could move so far, so fast, and still stay supplied. German intelligence could hardly believe the reports. Convoys of trucks stretching for miles, flowing day and night. Tanks refueled on the run, artillery constantly resupplied, infantry receiving hot rations even as they advanced. Where German divisions often ran dry within days of an offensive, the Americans seemed inexhaustible. For the first time, German generals admitted in their reports that U.S. logistics were not a weakness, they were a weapon. The human cost. But victory was not free. The men of the Red Ball Express paid with sweat, exhaustion, and blood. Drivers slept only a few hours between runs. Some died at the wheel, too tired to notice a bend in the road or a bridge too narrow. Others vanished in fireballs when their fuel-laden trucks were hit by German artillery or strafing aircraft. Mechanics worked through the night in the mud, pulling parts from wrecks to keep the convoys moving. Yet their determination never wavered. They painted slogans on their trucks: "No mission too tough, keep 'em rolling," and lived by them. To these men, every delivery meant lives saved at the front, battles won, and the war pushed one step closer to its end. Their courage was quiet but immense. Not charging bunkers, but keeping the pedal pressed when every instinct screamed to stop. The end of the laughter. By November 1944, the Red Ball Express had delivered over 400,000 tons of supplies. It had kept the Allied armies alive through their fastest and most dangerous advance of the war. With new ports like Antwerp opening and railways finally restored, the convoys could finally rest. But their mission was complete. They had done the impossible. They had silenced the laughter of the German generals. The same officers who once mocked American logistics now faced an enemy whose supply power was unmatched in history. The U.S. Army had proven that modern war was not just about courage on the battlefield. It was about the iron discipline of logistics, the roar of engines in the night, and the men who kept an army fed, fueled, and fighting. Patton's Blitz into the heart of Europe was not just the triumph of tanks and infantry. It was the triumph of the Red Ball Express, the unsung drivers, mechanics, and logisticians whose sacrifice turned ridicule into fear. In the end, the Germans learned a lesson they never forgot. Battles are won by firepower, but wars are won by supply. And in 1944, on the battered roads of France, the United States proved to the world that no one could outsupply America. The laughter had died. The thunder of engines had spoken.